Ever notice how both Chinese and British people are famous for being reserved, but for completely different reasons? One culture stays quiet out of collective harmony, the other stays polite out of social survival. But here's the twist that'll mess with your head. What if neither culture is actually being genuine? What if both forms of introversion are just elaborate performance art? Let's dig into this fascinating cultural masquerade. Chinese and British reserve might look similar on the surface, but underneath, they're operating from totally different playbooks. And honestly, once you understand the mechanics, you'll start questioning whether anyone is actually being authentic. Picture this scenario. You're in a meeting with both Chinese and British colleagues. Everyone's being incredibly polite, nodding thoughtfully, and saying things like, "That's an interesting perspective," or "Perhaps we should consider other options." Sounds harmonious, right? Wrong. There's a full contact psychological warfare happening, and most people don't even realize they're watching it. The Chinese participants aren't just being polite. They're calculating 17 different ways the conversation could affect group dynamics, family honor, and long-term relationship networks. Meanwhile, the British participants are deploying weaponized understatement, using phrases like, "I'm not entirely convinced," when they actually mean "this idea is catastrophically stupid." Here's where it gets wild. Chinese introversion isn't about personality, it's about social architecture. From childhood, Chinese people learn that standing out individually can destabilize the entire group. It's not shyness, it's sophisticated conflict prevention. They're not being quiet because they're naturally reserved. They're being strategically invisible because harmony maintenance is a full-time job. British reserve, on the other hand, is emotional armor disguised as good manners. They've turned deflection into an art form. Ask a British person how they're feeling, and they'll give you a weather report. Push them for genuine emotions, and they'll offer you tea. It's not politeness, it's advanced emotional camouflage. But here's what's uncomfortable to admit. Both systems are incredibly manipulative, just in opposite directions. Chinese reserve manipulates by never revealing what anyone actually thinks, creating this elaborate guessing game where everyone's trying to read subtle signals and indirect communications. British reserve manipulates by making emotional unavailability seem like sophisticated restraint. Think about Chinese family dynamics. Everyone's being incredibly respectful and deferential, but there's this intricate hierarchy of unspoken expectations, obligations, and judgments running underneath every interaction. You're not just talking to your aunt, you're navigating a complex web of family politics that goes back generations. The introversion is actually hypervigilant social awareness. British family interactions work differently, but achieve similar results. Everyone's being terribly polite and considerate, but they're also maintaining careful emotional distance through humor, understatement, and conversational deflection. You can spend hours with British relatives and leave knowing exactly nothing about how anyone actually feels about anything important. Here's what's really fascinating. Both cultures have developed these systems as responses to density and scarcity. China had to figure out how millions of people could live together without constant conflict. Britain had to figure out how to maintain social order in a rigid class system. Both solutions involve suppressing individual expression for a collective stability, but they've packaged it completely differently. Chinese face culture makes sense when you realize it's basically a social credit system that predates technology by thousands of years. Your reputation affects not just you, but your entire extended network. Being loudly individual isn't just antisocial, it's potentially economically destructive for people you care about, so introversion becomes civic responsibility. British stiff upper lip culture makes sense when you understand it was literally designed to maintain empire. When you're managing global territories with limited communication technology, you need people who can suppress, panic, maintain composure under pressure, and follow protocol even when everything's falling apart. Emotional reserve wasn't just social preference, it was imperial infrastructure. But here's where both systems get problematic. They've created cultures where genuine emotional expression is seen as either selfish or weak. Chinese people often struggle with direct confrontation even when it's necessary. British people often struggle with emotional intimacy even in close relationships. The result is that both cultures produce people who are incredibly socially skilled, but emotionally constipated. They can navigate complex social situations with amazing sophistication, but they can't always access or express their authentic feelings, even to themselves. Watch what happens when Chinese and British people interact with more emotionally direct cultures. Americans will bulldoze through Chinese indirectness and British understatement, completely missing the sophisticated communication happening. Meanwhile, Chinese and British people often find American directness crude and emotionally overwhelming. But here's the plot twist. Neither Chinese nor British reserve is actually about being introverted. It's about being socially strategic. Real introversion is about energy management and stimulation preferences. Cultural introversion is about power dynamics and social control. Chinese people can be incredibly loud, expressive, and socially dominant when they're in contexts where that behavior serves group harmony. British people can be remarkably warm, emotional, and direct when they trust that vulnerability won't be weaponized against them. The introversion is contextual, not inherent. This creates some interesting contradictions. Chinese social media is full of people being incredibly expressive, creative, and individually focused in ways that would seem to contradict traditional Chinese values. British people in informal settings can be surprisingly emotional and unguarded compared to their public personas. So what's actually happening here? Maybe both cultures are performing introversion rather than living it. Maybe what we're seeing isn't authentic personality expression, but rather sophisticated social costumes that people wear to navigate complex cultural expectations. The uncomfortable truth might be that neither Chinese reserve nor British politeness represents genuine emotional authenticity. They're both survival strategies that have become so culturally embedded that people mistake them for natural personality traits. Here's what's really provocative. Maybe the reason both cultures are suspicious of emotional directness is because they know how manipulative their own indirect communication systems actually are. When you're used to reading between 17 different lines of subtext, straightforward emotional expression feels dangerously naive. But let's flip this around for a moment. Maybe we're being too cynical. Maybe Chinese harmony-focused communication and British understatement-based interaction represent mature approaches to social complexity that more direct cultures could learn from. Chinese indirect communication allows for face-saving, relationship preservation, and conflict resolution in ways that American-style directness often bulldozes right through. British emotional restraint allows for functional interaction during stress, crisis, and conflict in ways that more emotionally expressive cultures sometimes struggle with. The question becomes, is emotional authenticity always more valuable than social functionality? Is individual expression always worth the cost to group stability? Maybe both Chinese and British cultures have figured out sustainable approaches to social organization that prioritize collective well-being over individual emotional expression. Or maybe that's exactly the kind of rationalization that keeps both systems running when they should be questioned. Here's my controversial take. Both Chinese and British introversion are sophisticated forms of emotional labor that have been culturally normalized to the point where people don't realize they're performing it. It's not authentic personality expression, it's advanced social management disguised as natural behavior. The real question isn't whether Chinese or British people are genuinely introverted, but whether their communication systems actually serve the people using them, or whether they serve the cultural institutions that benefit from emotional suppression and indirect communication. And here's the bigger question. What would happen if people in both cultures felt permission to be more emotionally direct? Would it destroy social harmony? Or would it create opportunities for more genuine connection and more effective problem solving? Maybe the answer is that both systems work for their intended purposes, but create unintended costs that are rarely acknowledged or discussed. So here's what I want to know. Have you experienced Chinese or British reserve firsthand? Did it feel like authentic personality expression or cultural performance? Have you seen situations where indirect communication was more effective than directness, or vice versa? And here's the deeper question. In your culture, how do you balance individual authenticity with social harmony? Is there a way to be emotionally genuine without being socially disruptive? Drop your experiences in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about how different cultural communication styles actually play out in real relationships and real conflicts. If you enjoyed this cultural deep dive, smash that like button, subscribe for more mind-bending cultural insights, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Which culture should I decode next? See you in the next one.